Okay, hello. Sorry for starting slightly later, but there's some tea and coffee and juice and candy corner and some sandwiches and things kind of provided by Cancer Focus NI over at the side. My name is Lisa and I will be your chair today. So first of all, we're just going to go through some announcements, and I'm going to make a food myself with suggestions box and a lovely competition that has cling film on it to keep them in. So, what was that? Okay, first of all, so we have our Irish Times debating competition. Registration, it's not our competition actually, registration ends on the 15th of October. So the Irish Times is a competition very like our own in-house debates. So you get the motion a week or so in advance. You get to prepare a speech 7 minutes long, same thing, first and last minute are protected. Get a wee trip to Dublin or Cork or Galway or Limerick or whatever it is, usually it's Dublin. So you can go down and compete with them. So if you would like to register interest or sign up for that competition, please email external@literafic.org or keep an eye on Facebook, and we probably won't Snapchat that. Facebook and Twitter, things like that. And the Literaforum, yeah. So if you haven't already added us, which I don't think many people have, the Literaforum, LITERIFORUM. Okay, it's sort of like our sort of like Facebook message board instead of like our like page. So you can be added onto that and be part of a group, and you get to sort of like hear. I don't know. You can get to like have more of a conversation with people and find out more about events and things like that. So please do add us on Facebook and like us and Snapchat us and everything. So that'd be great. What else do we have? Okay, so there's that. We have our UCD IB this weekend. So last call for a team to go to UCD, which is University College of Dublin. It's a novice competition, so there's no sort of previous experience needed. And if you would like to register interest in that, which is tomorrow, I know it's very, very short notice, but if you're stuck this weekend for something to do, why not? So again, speak to Ben, external Literafic, or just Facebook him because it's tomorrow. What next do we have? Okay, so we have our first year rep is going to be nominated this Monday. We have our reps somewhere, James. So you'll sort of be doing what he does, and last week he said he does nothing, which is not true. For first year rep. So if you would like to register your interest to be first year rep, please email secretary@literafic.org or Facebook us or message us or Snapchat us or whatever else. Too many forms of social media. And we'll sort of be holding like mini interviews, not much pressure, just sort of a few questions from council, which will be at about 6 o'clock on Monday evening. So there is that. If I bored you enough already. Yeah, okay, so you might notice that our debates are being recorded. We're streaming online now, so if any of you are speaking and you've got your family or anything to listen, far away, send them a link. Pardon? The links on Twitter, links on our website, fine to ask somebody as well. But apart from that, our lovely Honorary Life member Calvin will be leaving this year because he's graduating. So we're sort of in need of a guy or girl or someone that doesn't identify within the gender binary to be a tech person. So if you would be interested in audio recordings or sort of sorting out our website or just fancy playing with our brand new microphone, which we bought yesterday, it's so small and pretty.
Phone likes it as well.
It's ready made use.
Probably on Snapchat.
Snapchat, I guess. So if you would like to be a tech person, get in touch. You sort of be like shadowing Calvin, just sort of seeing what it's like. He's shown me how to work the programs. It's not that hard. It's just sort of like equalising the sound, things like that. And then uploading them, so it's not too difficult, and you do get to be involved. And what is next? Sorry, there's so many announcements this week. Stormont debate on Tuesday. This house would spoil its ballot, which is sort of an NI focused debate. We'll be meeting here at about 5:15, leaving Stormont to hopefully start the debate at about 6 o'clock. No one else will be like, no. Start the debate at 6 o'clock in Stormont. And we'll go for food and stuff afterwards, so that should be good. We do have to get a list of names to Stormont before the debate, so if you want to, contact Owen at internal@litterific.org, or speak to him now because he's right here.
The fantastic Anna Lowe will be there giving a speech.
Yes, Anna Lowe, fantastic Anna Lowe will be there giving a speech introduction at the start and welcoming us. She booked the Senate room, the Senate chamber for us to debate into, which is quite cool. Next, okay. Sorry. Letter reference, yes, text person. Okay, now to the fun stuff. So, comes a bit of a disclaimer, right? We don't have pizza vouchers right now, so I'm going to have to owe you 2 pizzas, right? But, do have a nice bottle of wine for whoever won the competition for the open debate. So, for those of you who weren't there, the Freshers, at Freshers Stall we had 4 of these wee tins, and they had FIFA, austerity, Corbyn and refugees as the topics of our open debate to the 5th of November. And the topic that was chosen was FIFA. So we have put, there'll be a motion based on that on the 5th of November, so we have put all the names in this jar, and I would like a volunteer, not somebody off council, somebody come on to my card, to pick out a name, and whoever picks out the name will, well, whoever's name is written on it, not whoever picks it out, will get a bottle of wine, and we will owe you 2 pizza vouchers. Volunteers, anybody? You've been here a while. Any freshers? No?
Don't be shy.
Yeah, I will do it. Oh, the girl behind you is a freshman. Okay, make it hard. I hope it's not the one that says austerity on the back of it. Matthew Cannon? Matthew Cannon here. If you're not hip, you don't get it. No, I don't think so.
One more.
This is going to be fun. Oh, thanks! It's you! It's me!
Game resigned. Game resigned. Oh, no, the other ones. Do they have the same name? All Marty Louise.
My middle name might well be Matthew Cannon.
So do you know Steph Blatter?
To be honest, I don't like red wine, so somebody else, you can have another go. But that's uncanny.
Does she even know?
Do you want that?
That line was
Just
good.
last time. But it's no, if it's you, none of them here.
Marty Louise.
It's
Claire.
Victoria Taylor? Where are these from? Freshers Fair? Jeanette Wu? Oh my god.
You guys are calling them fast Mary Louise. Do you think of a number in your head?
a really bad bottle of wine.
Sarah O'Neill?
I have to get the train at 9 o'clock, okay?
Andrew Leenan?
I don't like democracy.
This is the problem with democracy.
I know.
It's fair dictatorship.
Taylor, give me a bottle of wine.
Crazy.
Michael Carroll? Refugees. That's a double compensation. Oh my word. Okay, well we'll just... I do want to win it. That's, I mean, like... Where's my name? Did anybody actually come to Fresh? What's that? Yeah. Keep it. It's Steny McCollum? Tell you what, you do that. Oh, right? Right, we'll get on with it. If it comes up as Francis Nielsen, we know who's fixing it. Anna Montgomery. No? Do you know what? Anybody that entered that head. So, that's £2 a meal.
£2 fine.
He's not here. I can't do names, I just got one name. Yeah. Michael McCann.
I think these are all made up names. Except Louise.
Okay, so you can do that like quietly there, okay? Right. Okay, after that massive anti-climax, scarves for anybody that does actually come to the Linerific. So while they do that, we can hear the debate, or the minutes. No, tell a lie. Suggestions box. These are definitely here. Definitely. This is suggestion box. If you have any suggestions for the debate, to maybe write down cards where people are actually in the room, would be a suggestion. So we will read out some suggestions to give you chocolate. Every week it's chocolate. Chocolate.
You clearly aren't listening to suggestions.
Pardon?
You're not listening to suggestions then?
Mary Lewis is not bae. What? With 2 kisses?
Oh.
And no E.
Is that you?
No, I wrote that one. Mary Lewis is bae. Martin, say his name 3 times and he shall appear. Probably not. If Martin is here, he's got a bottle of wine.
You could try that on Tuesday.
Please open a window.
This is a suggestion for debate.
New suggestions. Okay. Wrapper bins. Oh, there's that one from last week. More Kinder, spelled MOAR. More Kinder chocolate. What? Love the internal convener. Which the internal convener is a friend of mine, and that is definitely his writing. To be a topic. Oh, pink one. Okay. No back and forth.
No.
That's true, no back and forth. Stickers.
Good advice.
Willie's the best cousin of me.
Are you serious?
Tell you what, right, the next one you pick out, we'll just put it on Facebook because,
Yeah.
and if they reply on Facebook, then they maybe come the next week. Okay, you have Oh, I know. She has got a bottle of wine if he's out there in cyberspace listening to us. Okay. Props and ops sit on opposing sides of the house, e.g. at Cambridge something House of Commons. Would you like that if you had to come in and choose a side?
Yeah.
But isn't the whole point that we decide at the end?
What do I do here in intro?
Yeah, nobody sit down. Go outside.
Drinks. Well, there's a lot of drinks at the back. We did answer that suggestion that we only saw today. Finbar's Bay.
One more, Madam President.
I love Linerific.
Perfect.
Last one, okay? So now we're going to hear the minutes from last week after I tidied this up. Which was this House Police the West created ISIS.
The usual. You're also kind. The first ordinary meeting of the Linerific took place on the 1st of October in the Senate room. I was attended by 104 members. President's questions are heard from Maggie Petkova, who resumed the proud tradition of asking the President what the President had for breakfast. The somewhat reluctant answer of sweets from the Freshers' Fair was met with cries of shame from the House. President Senate then announced the evening's motion. This House believes the West created ISIS. Main Speaker, Ms. Jessica Simmons, opened for the proposition in stating that our very perception of the Middle East has been maliciously defined by the Western media. She claimed that the way in which we are fed news about the area paints a picture of radicalisation and violence. However, this is not the full story. Additionally, she also asserted that current tensions between Middle Eastern countries have come about as a result of the original borderlines drawn up in Westminster back in 1916. A man by the name of Mark Sykes took one look at the map and told the Prime Minister, and I quote, "I should like to draw a line from the E in Accra to the last K in Kirkuk." These were simpler times. Another maiden speaker, Mr. Jeremy Muller, then rose for the opposition. Mr. Muller began with an analogy. Saying the West created ISIS is like saying appeasement caused the Second World War. Just because the West couldn't stop the rise of ISIS doesn't mean that we are an integral part in creating it. In reality, ISIS simply filled a power vacuum that had become apparent in the region as a result of the long-standing sectarian violence dating back to the Ottoman Empire. Mr. Kuz-Khan was up next for the proposition. He claimed that the opposition had been reading the news, not the history books. He asserted that the aforementioned power vacuum was created when the West destroyed Saddam's secular machinery and replaced it with some Shiite infrastructure. He reminded the House that the West had done deals with ISIS in the past in the hope of overthrowing Bashar al-Assad's regime in Syria. Additionally, we know through government leaks that the US sided with al-Qaeda for the same reason. Mr. Khan then asserted that taking into account these acts, in addition to several EU members buying oil from ISIS, it is impossible to say that the West didn't have a hand in the terror group's creation. Second for the opposition was Captain Kieran Gallagher, who rather honestly began by admitting that writing his speech wasn't quite as easy as he thought it'd be. Nevertheless, he began by refusing to apologise for the West's actions, claiming that we did indeed play a part in the formation of ISIS, but we far from brought about its creation. He claimed that the proposition had been championing an exaggeration of the extract of the truth, and that understanding how they came about, we must first actually listen to what ISIS are saying. He asked the House, if it was all about the West, how can one explain the rampant sectarianism and anti-Semitism in the region? Also making his maiden speech for the proposition was Mr. Jake Morris. He claimed that the tensions were indeed ever present in the region, but asserted that the US took a sledgehammer to a walnut in bringing about their own problems. Mr. Morris stated that the US dismantling the existing regime in 2003 provided the catalyst for Abu Omar al-Baghdadi declaring an Islamic State in 2006. The Western withdrawal left an interim government which the Sunnis despised, giving ISIS the platform with which to seize power. Speaking third of the opposition was Dr. Craig Miller. He railed against the opposition in saying that they were simply confirming the Middle East view of the West, that we have a complete misunderstanding of history. He lambasted the idea that ISIS broke away from al-Qaeda to combat the West. He asserted that ISIS primarily wished for a Sunni-dominated caliphate, unlike al-Qaeda, who wished to bring about the downfall of Western civilization as a whole. Finally, he claimed that all ISIS funds were courtesy of Qatari and Saudi donors, and not the West, as the proposition had stated. Concluding for the proposition was Mr. Owen Rice, who opened by stating that colonial divisions are present all over the world due to the redefining of borders. He went on to say that the US provided all the means for potential uprising by disbanding the Iraqi army, virtually eliminating employment in the area, and all this without providing subsidies. He concluded with a much-needed reminder that democracy is not universal, and that as a Western society, we have never beneficially overthrown a dictator. Concluding for the opposition and so the debate was Mr. Graham Alexander, who was quick to state that while it is not their immediate goal, ISIS are very much anti-Western civilization. He claimed that the idea of the US willingly providing ISIS with the means to cause terror was preposterous, and that the majority of the arms in use by Islamic State have been seized in combat. He concluded by saying that while the West may have been required in the timeline of ISIS, we are not its creator. The debate then moved to the floor, where questions were heard from Asia Sobe, Joe, Bradley, Alex Philpott, Conor McFall, Stefan Ivanicki, Michael, Declan and Emma Chadwick. The House was then brought to a vote based on Speaker's performance, which read Proposition 21, Opposition 36, with 16 abstentions. Can I take the minutes as read?
Okay, thank you. Very quickly, do we have any private members' business? Anybody, any questions? No? Blind president's questions? Anybody have any president questions? Can range from anything?
Madam President, what do you have for breakfast?
I did have a bowl of cereal, but the lunch was definitely more interesting. What was that? I put chilies in it. Oh, actually, it was horrible.
Wait, did you put chili in your cereal?
No, it was pasta. I'm a horrible cook. Put chilies in it. Gross. Any other questions? No? Okay.
Okay, that's a question. Do you have to be a student to take part in the Irish Times debate?
Oh, I think so. I'm not sure about alumni as well. I think alumni can speak like graduates. So
Last year there was people from the law, like the barristers' chambers.
oh right, okay. Well then graduates can as well. So Sam. Okay, so now we're going to move on to the debate, which is this House believes cancer treatment is overfunded. Firstly, some quick rules to the debate. So 7-minute speeches, first and last minute are protected. If you would like, I will bang the table, still haven't got the bell yet. So after the first minute, the middle 5 minutes you can ask questions, so stand up and say on that point sir, on that point man. And it's up to the speaker whether they want to take your question. So if they sort of wave you down and say, no, just sit down, you can jump up again. But you can't jump up immediately after asking a question or immediately after somebody else asks a question, or you will hear shouts of no barking from every other member in the room. Apart from that, so then the last minute again is protected, and at the end we can ask, there'll be a questions and answers back and forth at the end. So for this debate we're going to do something slightly different. We're going to have a preliminary vote at the start based on your opinion. So if you could raise your hand and say if you agree. There are abstentions, so there's proposition, opposition and abstentions. So if you agree this House believes cancer treatment is overfunded, could you raise your hand and say aye?
12.
And if you think that the opposition is true and it's not overfunded, raise your hand and say nay.
18, Madam President.
And all of you who abstain, until you've heard more. Okay, so now we're going to move on to the motion, and we're going to invite our, sorry, I completely forgot to introduce our guest chair for this evening, Professor Frank Kay. He will be giving a summary speech at the end, guest chairing alongside me. So I'd like to introduce our first speaker this evening, Miss Beth Matthews.
Okay, good evening everyone. So first of all, I'm going to lay out that this motion that cancer treatment is overfunded is an ethical debate on whether treatment of patients with cancer is too much, and in the process, does this have a detrimental impact on other patients? I understand, first of all, that this is an emotive subject, with most of our families likely to have been affected by cancer, including my own. So what I want to do is to ask if, with an increasingly under pressure NHS, are we currently using resources to benefit society the most? So first of all, I'm going to lay out how cost effectiveness is actually measured, which is conducted by NICE, and NICE is the National Institute for Health and Clinical Excellence. Some may say that in this process that it puts a price on life, but what it actually does is to assess whether a drug will have a substantial impact for its price based on high quality evidence, which is generally systematic reviews. So NICE uses an incremental cost effectiveness ratio to assess if a drug, first of all, is effective and at what price does the drug prove value for money without incurring opportunity costs. So this threshold that is generally used, although not explicitly stated, but is kind of agreed upon, is around £30,000 per QALY, and a QALY is quality of life adjusted year. So what this takes into account is life expectancy increase and quality of life of a person on that particular drug. So I'd like to go on now and say that NICE reviewed between 1998 and 2008 many cancer drugs. 11 of these were refused on the grounds of cost effectiveness, and they included 5 drugs that NICE were the most costly drugs that NICE have ever appraised. Just another example, in May 2010, NICE decided not to support a drug which was used for hepatocellular cancer in England and Wales, and I'm not going to try to pronounce it because I'm already nervous, I'll just make a muck-up of it. So if you want the names of them, come to me after. NICE advised that the drug was not cost effective, so it costed around £27,000 for each course of treatment, not for each QALY, and improves median survival by only 2.8 months. The media response was an outcry, with newspaper headlines including "Furious new cancer drug is banned." This is a typical picture of expensive cancer drugs that typically extend life by a matter of months. Well, you might say that those last 2 months are extremely important given that they are the months of end of life, but is it really worth paying over the odds for medications that extend life with patients with poor quality of life for a matter of months? Would the expense not be better funding palliative care that wouldn't only benefit cancer patients, but also give people with poor quality of life the dignity that they deserve when they're dying? While you might say that NICE is actually doing its job by refusing drugs that are not cost effective, but this is not actually the case. NICE has been accused widespreadly of approving drugs which are much higher cost per quality on simply those that are aimed at end-of-life care, which are most cancer drugs. First of all, this means that the NHS as a whole is missing out, but not only that, pharmaceutical companies can now get away with charging over the odds substantially for cancer drugs aimed at extending life by a matter of months.
Point of information, can you give some examples of that?
I would have to get the list out with the number of sources, but everything in this speech I have used from peer-reviewed literature. Every source that I have listed, and I have copies of those, is from peer-reviewed literature. So these aren't figures that I have made up myself. It is supported by well-regarded literature. So I can't give you examples off the top of my head, but I apologise for that. So pressure, as I was saying, has also come from patient lobby groups, which understandably have been outraged by some of these rejections. But there has, and I'm really sorry to sound cynical, there has been evidence in the past that these have been influenced by large multinational pharmaceutical companies. A recent study conducted by the Centre of Health Economics at the University of York says that health spending on costly drugs, especially those that prolong the lives of terminally ill patients, is not an effective use of NHS resources. And it actually says that costs should be capped much lower at £13,000 per quality, not £30,000 per quality, as NICE is saying. So it's more evidence that we're spending too much on these drugs. This leads me on to my last but large point on the Cancer Drugs Fund. This was set up by the Prime Minister in 2011 to deliver cancer drugs that were not available through the NHS. Unfortunately, there may have been a reason for this. The fund's budget increased from £200 million in 2013 to £340 million in April of 2014, and it's expected to rise to £410 million this year, an overspend of £70 million. Even Macmillan Cancer Support have said that it was never intended to be a long-term solution, with even the Cancer Drug Fund own chief executive saying in January that the fund should never have been created in the first place. The fund itself has already delisted 16 drugs from those that it offers to patients, and may I add that the patients are only in England. This fund is creating a postcode lottery inequality, with only English patients being able to receive drugs that the fund covers, whilst patients in Northern Ireland and Scotland are losing out. So in conclusion, I would like to say that I believe that cancer treatment is being overfunded. Cancer drugs are exceeding significantly the £30,000 per quality deadline or threshold that has been set by NICE in the past. Many of these cancer drugs are unfortunately only extending patients' lives by a couple of months in patients who already have a poor quality of life. There's also been a recommendation that this threshold should be reduced to £13,000 per year. I'd like to add that the Cancer Drugs Fund also offers poor quality of cost effectiveness, with its own chief executive admitting it shouldn't have been soaring costs, and only offering treatments to those in England. Would resources not be better spent in palliative care, health promotion and prevention to reduce cancer incidence in the first place? And I'd like to end by saying that cancer treatment is overfunded. So thank you.
Thank you. And can we have the first speaker for the opposition, Mr. Thomas Thompson?
I did start by saying I think we're going to cover very similar points, Beth, but I think we're seeing it from very different points of view. So sorry for anything, I'm going to repeat myself. Madam President, members of the proposition, fellow members of the opposition, members of the House, tonight I wish to convince you that cancer treatment is not only overfunded, but perhaps needs more funding. I begin by defining the motion, and then we'll give some figures about cancer, go into funding itself, and then quickly wrap up by talking about charities. So to define the motion by cancer treatment, we're really talking about all diagnostic tools used, chemo drugs used and radiotherapy used to treat cancer, as well as All research that goes into cancer and advertisements is used to prevent cancer. So 1 in 3 people get cancer. It's a fact we're all very familiar with, but in 2014, Cancer Research UK came out with new estimates. It's now believed that around 54% of men will get cancer and 48% of females, so it's actually higher than previously thought. And one reason for this is that people are living longer, so people are now living beyond chronic diseases such as infections and heart disease. And now they're getting more likely to get these sort of cancers, which is also quite concerning because it seems that most people in this room now will probably be affected by cancer, if not now, at some stage in their life. So it's a problem that isn't going away, and reducing funds isn't going to help matters. It's an illness that's so common today that about 1 in 30 people in the UK area are affected by cancer, yet they currently have it or in remission. But it's not all gloom and doom because survival rates are improving. Over the last decade, we've seen a decrease in 12 to 20 major cancer types, including 4 of the most common cancers, such as male lung cancer, followed by female breast cancer and prostate cancer. The largest fall was obviously with stomach cancer, which is a decrease of 30% for females and 35% for males. So we're starting to see that the money we pumped in has a positive effect. We're seeing that survival rates are improving, but other cancers still need work. Cancers such as liver cancer, we've seen an increase in the past decade of 44% in men and 50% female. Again, other cancers such as neck cancer, esophageal cancer are also on the rise. So overall, we've seen that survival is improving. When you compare that to the larger scheme that is like the EU, we're actually a bit far behind. So in the 1990s, lung cancer was about 7% survival here, while in Austria it was about 14%. Up in 2000, we managed to bring up to 10%, but Austria have already beat us to about 18%, so around double. So if we're going to start decreasing funding, we're going to widen that gap between ourselves and the EU even more. So can we don't know how this funding kind of comes from then? Beth's very touched on NICE and quals. And again, she's right, that is how we assess drugs and clinical effectiveness. Again, just to reiterate, it's about £20,000 to £30,000 per quals when a drug's going to be approved. And generally, most cancer drugs are inherently expensive, so they're never going to fit in that bracket. And that's because cancer drugs are more expensive to make, and because there's no real competition between pharmaceutical companies, and because no true generic really exists. Additionally, quals, the way we assess them, aren't really suited towards the lives of cancer patients, so the estimates are kind of skewed themselves. And again, there is this end-of-life criteria that touched on again, which is that NICE is willing to spend up to £50,000 per qual to increase the life between if a drug can increase life between 3 and 18 months. And again, if we're looking to reduce funding, we're going to reduce that threshold from 50,000 to 40,000 to 30,000 till maybe not even exist anymore. And again, in England, they do have that opportunity to go towards a cancer drug fund, and that's great for them because they have access to about 41 more drugs that we have here, which kind of puts patients in Northern Ireland, Scotland, Wales, right as you said, at disadvantage. Patients who are terminally ill now have to go to their consultants or cancer specialists and plead and argue their case that maybe I want that drug and get across the water because they have a different postcode for me. If we reduce funding, if we just funding here, it's going to be even harder for those patients that are already affected by those 41 drugs they can't get to make it even more tougher on themselves. Last year, NICE rejected 2 cancer drugs, and that's basically the budget we currently have. If we reduce that even more, how much more drugs are they going to reject? I kind of like to sum up with that. I was talking about charities. The fact that so many cancer charities exist is a note to itself that we're probably underfunding cancer. There's about 371 registered cancers in the UK, and every year these people are running marathons, doing breakfast mornings, and this month you'll see Stop October, so we'll stop drinking from Macmillan Cancer. There's also things like Marie Curie, which looks at palliative care, and I had the privilege of working with them this week, and I've seen some of the great things they did. And you see things like Cancer Focus NI here tonight, and there's Cancer Research, which is actively helping industry and academics get research through. So again, it's to kind of come back to the point, the fact that we have those cancers, those charities, and those charities exist. We're looking at the fact that necessitates the need for more research and funding. The fact that people are going to bring their own pocket, they want to actively research their own money into cancer. Recently, about 2 days ago, I seen an article on BBC News that looked at how end-of-life care in the UK was ranked number 1 in the world. Cancer patients make up a great deal of palliative care patients. So cancer research cancer research not only benefits cancer patients, but lessons we learn from those cancer patients in palliative care can directly be applied to any patient in palliative care. So when you're funded in cancer research, You're indirectly funding many other diseases
On that
too.
point, sir?
Yeah, go ahead.
It's not quite easy then for us just to shift our research into palliative care because it has become its own specialty in its own right. So we don't necessarily need research into cancer itself, but into palliative care.
Well, what I'm saying is that if you are funding the cancer, you're not just funding cancer, you get like a bonus, like a +1. So you don't buy one, get one free. It's really to summarise, it's true, money is tight right now, but cutting funding towards cancer isn't the way to do it. There's quite a lot of patients are affected by cancer, I think. There was reports, I have written here, Living Well for Longer, released April 2014, and it said about like 42% of premature deaths were cancer, and that's quite a big portion. So if you're taking away a bigger portion of funding, you're going to impact a bigger portion of patients. It's just maths. So I've already kind of discussed that a lot of funding has been fruitful. We've seen that we put money into cancer research and we've seen good survival rates. We've money into cancer, we've seen like palliative care become #1. However, cancer rates aren't perfect. Again, I want to bring you back to what, when you compare to the EU, we're still far behind, so we're still lagging behind. And again, those 41 drugs that Northern Ireland patients can't get, that's what's going to be harder for them again to get their funding. And finally, the existence again of those charities kind of shows that we probably need more funding. So, just to kind of finish off, I think we've come quite a long way in cancer therapy. I don't think it's right to slow that pace now, so I encourage you to vote up. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Welcome our second speaker of the evening, Dr. Claire Miller.
Beth's already alluded to the media's role in the way that people are putting their hands in their pocket to fund cancer care. Now, you hear in the media, we'll cure your cancer. But to me, that is literally just spreading of poor knowledge and poor information. Most people in this room know that cancer is not one single disease, and therefore doesn't need one single treatment. And for a charity like Macmillan to go, we're going to cure cancer, to me is just the cause of the problem in this argument. There's a huge overspend in cancer treatment at the moment in terms of time, money and resources. And all it's doing is causing more health inequality within the UK at the moment. Now, to give you an idea in terms of leading causes of death in the UK, which has been talked about already, the leading cause is coronary heart disease at 375,000. Combined cancer is 250,000. There's other things such as stroke at 235,000 and dementia at 175,000. Just to give you an idea of the picture of the disease burden in the UK at the moment. Today I'm going to talk about how this disease burden picture is not being represented in terms of the amount of money that is being pumped into research and into treatment. And I'm going to talk about the preventative measures necessary that we should actually be concentrating on. The BMJ in 2015 published the following data, and it said that 64% of the government's research funding is being put into cancer. That's 64%, right, for something that takes 25% of the total disease burden. Dementia, which affects 175,000 people, is getting 2% of the budget. Stroke gets 7% of the budget, both of which have got much higher disease burdens. Now, I think that we are overfunding the
Point
treatment
of
of cancer.
information, stroke does not have a higher incidence than cancer.
Well, stroke has a higher incidence in terms of actual single disease, but if you take, that's what the BMJ said in terms of the paper I read in 2015. The exact figures were stroke at 235,000, then colorectal cancer at 90,000, breast at 60, prostate at 60, esophageal at 43.
At that point,
No barrier. I think it's fair to see that you can see there is diseases that are being overfunded in terms of the research budgets that are being allowed. Now, people now just think you get dementia, you die. That's what happens. It takes a while, but it happens. Why has it become acceptable? In my opinion, it's because of the chronic underfunding and the fact there is no hope on the horizon for such a disease. Cancer simply just gobbles up finances that are available in terms of money and in terms of the expertise that's around. We cannot just magic postdocs who are capable of doing this research, and it's these highly trained people in things like translational medicine or genetics that are the key to solving these problems. The underspending in dementia is so drastic that even simple measures like exercise we don't know as a general public. I didn't know until I was reading this paper. Exercise prevents dementia. I didn't know that until I read the paper, and I'm training. Now, furthermore, there's another paper in the BMJ in 2015, and it was talking about the overall disease way in which we can prevent coronary heart disease. Now, most of us in the room probably think it's to do with cholesterol intake. There was a paper in 2015 that was talking about the main deciding factor, apart from genetics, would be your calorie intake, not your cholesterol intake. We don't know that because the amount of money that's being pumped into cancer is taking away the resources from all the other areas with the massive disease burdens that our country has. And it's simply this overfunding of research into things like cancer that are causing a problem in things like coronary heart disease and dementia, yeah.
Isn't this all just a really long-winded way of saying the NHS can't afford cancer treatment? But isn't it flawed logic that because other diseases are underfunded, that cancer treatment is overfunded? One doesn't necessarily lead to the other.
Okay, so in terms of, I just try and say that in terms of the actual money, that's not the main argument here with research. It's to do with the actual expertise that we've got. And to become a postdoc, it takes a degree, it takes sometimes a master's, then a PhD, and only at that point would you become a postdoc. And these are the people that are the ones that are doing the research. You don't magic these people out of thin air. It takes a long time to train the people in the areas that are needed. So if you've got an area such as cancer that's taking so much resource, then you can't then take these people out and start getting them to do other things, even if there's money available, because the people aren't there. So it's not just about money. Now, drugs, on the other hand, which has been talked about by Beth, that has got a much more financial implication. And we seem to end up with this sort of ideological view of the left saying let's increase taxes and the right going let's make cuts. And we get stuck in this ideological battle of cuts versus tax raises with no actual compromise on either side, and there's no pragmatic outcome. In my opinion, there's one area in which we can actually make some cuts, and that is the Cancer Drugs Fund. In my opinion, it's literally just expensive palliation. Basically, to keep somebody alive for an extra 2 months at the end of their life is deemed as much more important than other things such as a cochlear implant, or a liver transplant, or kidney dialysis. These are the areas where we're taking money away from to fund things like 2 months at the end of your life. Now, I'm not saying one is more or less important. I'm not going to stand up there and go, we shouldn't do that. But what I'm saying, in an NHS where we are about £14 billion in the hole, the one thing we have to be doing is treating everybody equally. And we're currently not doing that. The Cancer Drugs Fund, to me, is simply a popularist gesture which gives the impression of benefiting patients, but in fact rewards poor quality drugs whilst benefiting a handful of pharmaceutical companies at the expense of taxpayers and a full range of NHS patients. Even Labour's Andy Burnham is against the fund, and he's about as left as remains logical. 40% of cancer is self-inflicted. Smoking, diet, alcohol, sun damage, the 4 top causes. Investment in the early years is the key to preventing cancer from occurring. That's where we need to be putting our money. That's where we get the most bang for our buck. This overfunding and overinvestment in cancer research and pharmaceutical treatment at the detriment of vital societal changes is what is needed. This is where funding should be going. We should not be paying ridiculous rates per quality. What in treatment is ultimately expensive palliation, which affects a tiny group of our population. I urge you to vote for the motion.
Thank you, and I would like to welcome our second speaker of the opposition, Mr. Andrew Hammond.
Okay, good evening all. I'd first of all like to emphasize that the motion today essentially takes the position of imbuing a death sentence to an untold number of the 2.5 million people living with cancer in the UK alone. Combined cancer types is the leading cause of death in the country. Let me be clear, I'm not here to advocate wasting money. I'm here to say that if a treatment is effective at being a treatment, then the costs are warranted. My main message tonight is that smart and non-wasteful spending with respect to cancer, or any other disease of such a serious nature actually, is totally justified. Before we even talk about the cost of cancer, let's examine what the spirit to treat this pervasive disease over time has managed to achieve. A 2014 Macmillan article stated that in the early 1970s, the overall median survival time for someone with cancer was only 1 year. Now it's increased to about 6 years. Survival has gone from 24% to 50% in those 40 odd years. This increase is This increase is attributed to advances in diagnosis, treatment, and care, the likes of which would not have been possible without an emphasis on continuous investment and funding towards improving survival rates. For a patient to live now in a time where cancer doesn't necessarily mean certain death isn't just fortune. It's a result of many years of dedication and funding and determination on all fronts to beat this nasty disease. Entertaining the thought of a health service reducing funding to treat a disease, which was said just now that 1/3 of this room will probably experience at some point in their lifetime, is absolutely absurd.
On that point, sir.
Yeah.
So we keep using this example of 1 in 3 people get cancer with the focus, which would actually benefit many different diseases that a huge patient population will get, is to try and reduce that figure of 1 in 3, not try and just treat the 1 in 3.
Well, I'm saying at the moment it is that 1 in 3 people will get cancer, and I'm saying that the fact that so many people now can say that they've lived through it is and beaten it is because of the treatment that they've had. Maybe later on, better preventative care, that rate will hopefully go down, that 1 in 3 will hopefully go down, but at the moment that's what it is. Anyway, that being said, let's not be unrealistic about the figure of the cost of cancer. The NHS spent £5.9 billion on cancer care between 2009 and 2010, which was about 6% of the total health spend. The breakdown of this cost is as follows: about a quarter on inpatient care, which is not including surgery, the other quarter is surgery, and about a fifth of it on drug treatment. Diagnosis only about 10%, radiotherapy about 5%, and so on. One may argue that the new technologies and medications, which is the several medications that have been brought up, yes, they're very, very expensive. And it has been mentioned before that the qualities for cancer cancer itself is so unique that it just, the aspect of quality just doesn't fit with the expense of the unfortunate cost of the drugs at the moment. Their expense is justified, however. Think back to my previously mentioned statistic. A double in the survival rate of cancer in the last 40 years. That's what has happened. If we had adopted a tight belt approach towards cancer in the past, it would not have been possible. Adopting one now will certainly restrict future development and lengthen the time taken for cheaper and more effective treatments to be brought about, as well as ideally a cure, and a cure for the several types of cancers that there are. An early diagnosis of cancer is perhaps the most valuable tool that we can have to prevent death or increase survival rates. Up to 10,000 deaths per year can be prevented in the UK alone if diagnosis is made at an early stage, and the financial cost will still be high, but the human cost of 10,000 potentially saved lives is completely warranted. I had said just now that the spend on diagnosis is about 10% of the budget for cancer.
On that point,
okay.
What about trying to identify more cancer, actually decreasing the people's quality of life, and the diagnosis itself being cancerogenic? You can't just go about throwing money and scanning everyone there is.
No. You see, what I'm saying now is that the fact is that somebody will take an average of 3 GP visits before they actually have a cancer diagnosis, because of the fact GPs are scared to refer people because of the fact that it's so-called wasting money from the NHS. So I don't say that it's vastly in the opposite direction of us. We're not saying to screen everybody, but if it is that they are suspected, then they should. So that's what I'm saying. Anyway, The freedom for GPs to refer suspected cancer cases should be increased, but at the moment, GPs feel pressure to diagnose symptoms based on limited histories and exams, and by giving the NHS rather than the patient the benefit of the doubt, treatments will cost far more at a later stage. And going back to what was said just now, one may argue that the leading type of cancer, lung cancer, is actually preventable. That is, smoking is a leading cause of the leading cause of cancer. So then why should our hard-earned tax money be spent on others' bad habits? But the other top contenders for death are also preventable causes like respiratory disease, coronary heart disease, and stroke. So that argument doesn't work either. Lastly, let's not be naive. Are we sure that cutting the budget to cancer treatment will really benefit the patient population? Far too often we hear very real and troubling stories about mismanagement within the NHS. Do we know whose interest is really going to be protected by the very dangerous notion of reducing budget allocation? And how about starting by cutting out the £6 million a year that are completely wasted on homeopathic concoctions that have no therapeutic benefit? How about stop wasting money on unnecessary consultancy? And how about not encouraging schemes for GPs to refer other, including suspected cancer cases? So don't be penny wise and pound foolish. The cost of cancer is high, but the cost of stupidity is even higher. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And we get another clap for Andrew as he is the main speaker. Now can I welcome Mr. Jack Thompson.
Hello. You haven't got your mouth yet, have you? Sorry?
Move back and forth.
Fellow members of the proposition, members of the opposition, Madam President, Professor Key, and the House itself, thank you for coming out tonight. Today I'd like to just finish up for the proposition on this House believes that cancer treatment is overfunded. So before I get into all minds, I'd like to do some rebuttal and things like that. So, you talked about, Thomas, about stomach and lung cancer. Yes, stomach and lung cancer have seen a massive increase in survivability, or they have seen an increase in survivability. Have seen an increase in survivability over this past period, and you're saying that it's showing how well cancer treatment is doing. But in fact, stomach and lung cancer are being still massively underfunded for the prevalence of them, of how things. In terms of how much they're funded compared to other diseases, and it goes on to one of my big points of disease burden versus equal expenditure. So how much are we spending on diseases based on their burden? Then also we have, we're talking about the massive increase or the massive decrease in death from cancer and the increase in detection of it, but that's a lot more cheaper than the expenditure of these massively expensive drugs that we've had coming on to increase life expectancy by 2 to 18 months. So again, we've talked about before, increasing and focusing in on prevention. But first, what I'd like to talk about, and I'd like to mention, is I think we've gotten a really bad rep on the proposition that we really seem to have given the idea that, you know, we're saying, no more money for cancer research at all. We're not going around saying that we want to completely strip money from cancer research. We're saying that we want to take away some of the money that we think is being overused and put it where it'll be more economic, where we'll see a greater outcome for people in the public, where the people in the public will benefit a lot more from it in itself. So let's look globally, because we've got to think a lot more globally since we're a global globe. Since we're a global globe now, and since there's a lot more globalization, we've got to think globally of things are going. So the massive things that we've talked about, we're saying ischemic heart disease, stroke, COPD, which is chronic obstructive pulmonary disease, and lower respiratory tract infections are the massive killers globally. And below that, in that order, then we come to tracheal, bronchial, and lung cancers, and they're the next ones. But if we actually look at the difference in how much death they cause, that's about 1 million for the tracheal, bronchus, and lung cancers. Whereas if we then look up the next one, it's 3.1 million for lower respiratory tract infections, 3.1 million for COPD, 6.7 million for stroke, 7.4 million for ischemic heart disease. So there's a massive, massive burden of disease in these non-communicable diseases. which need to be tackled in themselves as well. Vascular disease is one of the biggest killers, and vascular disease is very, very preventable, it's modifiable risk factors in itself. And what we actually need is more affordable and more effective research into these diseases to reduce the disease burden from them. Taking money away from cancer research, redirecting it towards this research, so for people who are being affected far more by it, and people whose qualities as well are being affected just as much. If we actually look at how much money is funded in total for these big ones of vascular disease, of ischemic heart disease, of stroke, dementia, and cancer. We have about £856 million being spent by the UK government. 64% of that goes towards cancer, even though that ranks pretty far down compared to ischemic heart disease and stroke and of dementia as well. If we actually also look at the healthcare costs and the social costs as well of all these diseases, there's massive amounts of research needs to be put into how we can better prevent these diseases because of the social cost of each of them. For every £10 spent on social care costs for the diseases, £1.08 is spent on cancer research and development, how we actually look into that itself. Out of dementia, which is actually costs more in terms of social costs than cancer, stroke and ischemic heart disease combined, there's only 8p spent per £10 of social care, and that's a massive difference for something that has such a huge social cost, for something that affects so many people in society, and for something that people who are cancer survivors may be affected by afterwards. Now this gets on to the point that people are living longer because cancer, we're not trying to say cancer treatment and everything is done is bad. What we're trying to say is that we need to try and reduce this disease burden of people. People are living longer. People who live longer have more diseases. People who have more diseases have multiple comorbidities. These multiple comorbidities come together and accumulate into this massive cost. So why attack one thing when we can attack multiple things? Go from a multi-pronged approach, and what we can find is that we can reduce the actual spending that we spend on people, reduce the disease burden, improve people's lives, improve the quality of life of people by spending money on other aspects of their life, not just cancer. People who've survived from breast cancer, who've had radiotherapy from breast cancer, who've had radiotherapy from lung cancer, they have massive constrictive lung disease afterwards. How about we work on improving on constrictive lung disease? How about we work on lung disease such as COPD, which some people can be affected with afterwards? What we got to look at as well is the current cancer research in itself is unbalanced. A lot more money is spent on breast cancer, leukemia, and as well prostate cancer, because they're a lot more emotive. Little Johnny got leukemia. Little Johnny's had leukemia at 5 years old. Your mother, everyone's mother, grandmother. A lot of women are affected by breast cancer, and as men as well are affected by breast cancer. They're very, very emotive. But there's a lot of people affected by stomach cancer. There's a lot of people affected by uterine cancer. There's a lot of people affected by cervical cancer. Stomach and uterine cancer receive about 10% of the funding of what breast and leukemia receive, but they affect just as many people. This comes to show that there's a very emotive side to research and in itself, and there's an inherent imbalance in cancer research in itself, and because of that inherent imbalance, there's an inherent imbalance in terms of the entire research that is happening, but in terms of the entire research of other non-communicable diseases. The biggest killer in the world now is not infectious diseases like in Africa, malaria killing people. The biggest killer is these non-communicable diseases. These diseases such as coronary heart disease and stroke. We really need to look into these ones to really improve the lives of people and bring them out of this disease burden. There's also the fact of ageism as well. Oh, we granny's got arthritis, she's got Alzheimer's, oh, she's getting these, oh, there's nothing we can do, nothing at all. All these small things that we just think are a natural part of life and it's going to happen. What we've got to do is we've got to look into these, how we can improve people's lives because of this massive disease burden has people. My final point I wanted to get is current research looks at qualities. Qualities look at morbidity and mortality. That's looking at an end outcome. How do we reduce mortality? That's not what we should be looking at. As the opposition has said before, and I'll reiterate the point, we have to look at reducing incidence. Incidence is better. It's the classic saying of prevention is better than cure. Qualities and how we assess how we should put our money into research is inherently flawed. We put money into reducing incidence, not into reducing mortality as it's currently being researched. So, we don't hate cancer. We don't hate cancer treatment. We do hate cancer. We don't hate cancer treatment. We just think that we should spread things more equally so we can reduce the disease burden for everybody, including those with cancer. I implore you to propose the motion. Thank you very much.
Professor Mark
you very much. I'd like to thank the Literific Society for renewing my debating career. It was not only in the last century, it was actually in the last millennium. The last time I actually debated in the Hist in Dublin. And as you can see, my writing has got bigger in that intervening period. What I'd like to do this evening is really to say to you, to bring you back to reality. We've heard too much about bean counters and figures and numbers and qualities. What we want to talk about is the human aspect. We want to talk about the patient. 3 people die in Europe every minute from cancer. So that means from when this debate started to now, over 100 people have died of cancer. If we look in relation to the figures, and I'm sorry I'm going to have to contradict you, in relation to the actual data says that premature death from cancer occurs in over 50% of European countries. That's fact. Frightening statistics. And these statistics really mean that if we look around this room, I'm sure everybody in this room is affected by cancer. I want to take you back in Northern Ireland to 1995. If you were here, a woman, in 1995, and you were diagnosed with breast cancer, the first problem would be you hadn't been diagnosed early enough because the actual diagnostic system, the screening system, was not in place properly. It was very disjointed. The second thing was, if you actually wanted to get surgery for that breast cancer, the chances are there wasn't a surgeon who could actually do that. Because 64% of the surgeons had only done less than 10 operations per year. Would you actually trust that system? I certainly wouldn't. I wouldn't let my wife or my daughters be actually in that system. And that was where we were in 1995. We had the worst incidence and we had the worst mortality, which is most important, for all cancers within the UK. We then got our act together, we had the Campbell report that was produced, and that made a huge difference because what it involved was investment in cancer services, structuring of cancer services, so that if we take that same woman with breast cancer, by 2006, the risk of mortality had gone down by 30%, so by a third. By 2013, and you can see it, you go back to the websites and BBC, we were now being reckoned as being the best for survival in breast cancer in the UK. Do we want to go back to 1995? We certainly do not. 20 years ago, but we risk doing that at the moment. And it's a very real risk. And it's a real risk because at the moment, even as we speak, people are talking about trying to take away things from cancer. I do agree in relation to, as the opposition have said, in relation to investing in other diseases. That's not what we're talking about here. That's a red herring in relation to it. If we reduce our spending on cancer at the moment, it will have a critical effect on our patients.
On that point, sir? How do you suggest then that we get more money for these other diseases if we're not going to take money away from cancer?
We have to look at how we actually restructure our health system. We need to look at our health system. I would agree there are wastages in our health system, but our wastages are at middle management level. If you look at the way the NHS has been structured and restructured, the restructuring took so long to do, involved so much middle management. That's where we need to hit. We shouldn't be fighting disease against disease. We should actually be looking at the system and saying, where can we actually take the real waste and invest that into prevention, invest it into dementia? I would agree with you totally. I have no issue in relation to that, but we shouldn't be pitting diseases against diseases. If we do that, then we're actually taking away what is an inalienable human right, the right to actually receive care. Nye Bevan set up the NHS in 1958 on the principle of equality. And that's what we need to see today. We need to see an equality of the patient and the patient being recognised as an individual. One of the things we start to see as we look around in cancer today is that we have this risk of inequalities. And there are inequalities, the inequalities in relation to access to cancer drugs in Northern Ireland. So what you do something about it. Cancer Focus Northern Ireland drove a campaign, 30,000 signatures given to the Minister of Health on the steps of Stormont. They're the types of things you need to do. Interestingly, as Oscar Wilde would say, we lost one health minister when that campaign started. We lost a second health minister when not long after we actually gave him those 30,000 signatures on the steps of Stormont. And the way things are going at the moment, we could lose a third. I'm not sure what Oscar Wilde would have said about that. But one thing I want to say is we're tending just to focus on one narrow aspect. We're talking about cancer treatment here. And there are many aspects to cancer treatment. There's radiotherapy, surgery, and it's very important that we don't skew the debate just into one area. But what I do want to do is to focus on the whole area of personalised medicine, because that's where some of the drugs that have been referred to are coming from. And what I want to show you is a vision of how we do actually make that deliver, but also deliver both from a cost point of view as well as improving your health. And I'll actually take an example from across the border, a trial that was used to treat women with breast cancer. And in order to decide whether the patient received chemotherapy or not, you do a test, a DNA test. And it tells you, based on looking at 21 genes in your body, as to whether you will have a high or a low risk of the breast cancer coming back. Before this test was introduced in the Republic, 87% of women with early breast cancer got chemotherapy. And if we look at the situation post the test being introduced, that was reduced to 30%. So there we have a great example of how we actually use the technology, use that investment to actually get better care, because it means that 57% of patients didn't have to get chemotherapy, which means that they're not going to get any of the side effects associated with it. But it also saved the Exchequer, in a 15-month period, 730,000 euros. We've done similar studies in relation to what it would take in Northern Ireland, and we can look at exactly the same, and it would save in a calendar year over 400,000 based on the population of Northern Ireland. So they're the type of things we need to be thinking of doing. And also we need to look at the person. We need to look at the situation that if we can actually cure more patients, they will then go back into society. They will resume society. They will contribute to society. And that's an incredibly important part of a person. A person isn't just somebody who's cured of a disease. They need to be able to reintegrate into society. And that's what we're seeing now when we actually cure. There are 14 million European survivors from cancer. And what we're actually now seeing is they're beginning to reintegrate into society, contribute to society, and that value is never measured in equality. And that's the real value. That's what we're talking about, where people actually are able to go back into society. So I just want to start, I started in 1985, I'm going to go forward to 2050. And what I'm going to say is, if we do not change, if we try and change the situation, if we reduce the amount of funding in relation to cancer because of the increasing age of the population, what we will see is that in that 7 or 8 minutes, or maybe 8.5, over 100 people will die, not every minute, every 10 seconds. So I absolutely urge you to reject this motion on the basis that it's going to be actually have an effect, a negative effect on our patients. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
I'm glad you were last.
Okay, thank you, that's great. Can we get another round of applause just for our main speaker again, Professor Mark Lawler, and for our guest, Cancer Focus NI. So I think it's a pretty good bit. So we're going to go through some questions now. I'm going to take first questions to the proposition, then the opposition, then abstentions, or just points on the motion. So does anybody have any questions for the proposition? Yes. Could you stand up and state your full name, please?
John Finlay. Unless I'm constructing a massive straw man here, part of the argument the proposition made was that I might have inferred this, but you can tell the cancer funding or the cancer research is overfunded because we're absolutely saturated all the time with stories about cancer and how to ways of not getting cancer, whereas we don't get all those about other very common and very morbid diseases. The point was also made that we should be spending more time on preventive care which will prevent not just cancer but many other diseases. Clearly, we are spending a lot of time on research into prevention of cancer. Those are coming out every day. You look at the newspaper, and there's something that you shouldn't do now because it will give you cancer, and yet 1 in 3 people will still get cancer. So it would appear that people aren't listening to the research anyway.
So, just to clarify what you're saying, you're just wondering whether or not us talking about does preventative care work, basically? Okay. So I think what we're looking at is, you see, you're talking about all these things you read in the newspaper, and I think all the time you have to take those with a pinch of salt, because there's ones that talk about curries that can cure you from cancer, but you've got to have 1.2 tons of the curry or something to actually have any beneficial effect.
Cure you most things.
So I think what we got to do is when we talk about proper preventative care, we're talking about actually trying to, I'm going to use my catchphrase, a proper cultural shift of actually trying to change the attitudes of people and through education, through campaigns that already has been seen in cancer, but not just campaigns for cancers such as people going for mammography, or people going for their cervical smears, or people taking up HPV, but taking on proper preventative care for reducing smoking, reducing alcohol intake, calorie intake, all different multitudes of things. So what we're really talking about is stepping back from that, and we're not giving very direct or exact ones, but basically we're talking about preventative care from that respect. Being more.
Thank you. Okay, so we're going to skip responses. You can talk about it afterwards. So next question to the opposition, which is this side of the floor. No, you don't like the reasons. Yes, stand up, see your full name, please.
Jim Cargill. Something that all 3 of the members of the proposition touched on but wasn't responded to by the opposition was this idea that we could divert some of the money that's going into cancer treatment and put it into cancer prevention. This was again touched on in the last question. I'd like to hear your opinions on that.
Yeah, I would certainly agree that we should be spending more money on cancer prevention, because I think we can see examples of where it's worked, smoking prevention, etc. I think what we just need to look at, though, is how we do that. Do we look at ways, or the taxation ways we can do that as well? So I don't think we should necessarily think that just because we're saying that we should automatically take it from the treatment budget. But I do agree that we do need to look at ways in which to increase prevention budget and also prevention research.
Thanks. And do we have any sort of neutral points on the motion? Anyone else say anything?
Just an observation, as a neutral point on the motion states this House believes cancer treatment is overfunded. Both sides brought in the issue of research. The motion is about treatment. Treatment is paid for in Northern Ireland by you and me as taxpayers. So we as taxpayers want to see the dividend from that. Research is a public and a private enterprise. So I was surprised to see both sides bringing research into the debate, whereas I thought it was about what the taxpayers paying for in terms of treatment services. It's just an observation that both sides were.
Okay, would you like to briefly respond to sort of lack of mention of treatment, maybe?
Well, I can say this now. Jack brought up it and defined it in the motion. Thomas, sorry.
Happens all the time, it's okay.
I think the two are intricately related, treatment and research. I don't think you can basically talk about one without the other. In terms of taxpayers, as far as I remember, the National Cancer Research Institute was talking about, I can't remember if it's 40 or 60% of the actual research budget for cancer is directly out of the taxpayer's purse. So we are talking about it because it comes out of the taxpayer's purse, and without the research you're not going to get the treatment updates.
No, there's only one other side. Please, a brief.
So yeah, no, great. Yeah. Sorry, Thomas. So no, I think Craig what I was going to say. At the start of my speech, I did define the motion that by cancer treatment we did include research, because research in cancer is still groundbreaking. So on the age all the time, it's hard to kind of separate the two, because a lot of patients are going to go on drugs that are in stage 1 and stage 2 clinical trials. So it's hard to separate them. So I think that's why we all kind of touched on them, if that answers your question.
Thanks.
Just an observation. I respond right at the end.
Okay, so we'll have one more round of questions. So, does anyone have any questions to the proposition again? That's this side. Yes. So, say your full name, please.
Hello, Conor Hogan.
I enjoyed the debate. I think there's been a nice focus on cancer treatment within the NHS. It's sort of broadened a bit and to build on the point that Ms. Chadwick mentioned earlier. If it could be proven that maybe it's not necessarily that cancer treatment is overfunded, but that other diseases like virus and conveyance, such as dementia, are underfunded, and that the amount of funding that we're slogging over is fundamentally insufficient, and that perhaps by taking funding from other government sectors, like military, something like that, we could provide sufficient funding for all diseases. What would you say?
So yes, I do agree that other diseases are underfunded, but the point still stands that cancer treatment is overfunded, and I think the prime example of that is the Cancer Drugs Fund. So this year they're predicted to spend £410 million on cancer treatments that will probably, unfortunately, only extend patients' lives by a couple of months, and I think that sort of proves the point.
He's dying to respond, but there's only one. Okay, does that answer your question? Thanks. Yes, question to the opposition? Yes? That answer your comment, please.
I would have a question to Jeremy Mueller. I would just have a question to the opposition. The opposition mentioned that they talked a lot about how to use limited resources, which is really economics, because resources are limited, how to best use them in order to increase survival rates as a whole across the whole spectrum of diseases that affect the UK or Europe. And I felt like the opposition hadn't really responded to that. I felt like there was a lot of talk about mortality rates and how mortality rates would increase if we decreased funding now and such. But would that really, I would like a response about the broader spectrum. Why should we be funding cancer as opposed to dementia or as opposed to other diseases which may have a better effect?
Because if we reduce the funding in cancer based on the fact that we're going to have a cancer epidemic, if we actually don't do something about it, if we then reduce funding on it, we're then going to certainly have an epidemic, and the figures that I quoted at the very end are going to be true. And so that's really the issue, that we have a time bomb here ticking. And if we look in Northern Ireland, it's just the same as everywhere else, only we seem to get the butt end of the stick in relation to not having access to drugs that other people are available to.
Thank you. And we have one last point on the motion, or sort of abstaining. Yes, start state your name, please.
Is the problem definitely that cancer is overfunded, or is it not that the funds going towards cancer research are not being spent in the most effective way? Because I find it hard to believe that cancer can be overfunded when we haven't yet found a cure.
Controversial. Very much clincher at the end. Very brief response from both sides. Proposition first.
I guess the first thing you talk about is this real golden kind of idea of cancer being cured. I don't think we ever will truly find any cure for cancer, because cancer is really a big umbrella term for things. But I think I would agree with you that cancer isn't being spent in the most efficient way, and it's not being spent in the areas that it should be. I would agree more so that there should be a lot more on prevention rather than the current treatments and the really heavy chemotherapy drugs, which don't really extend that much. I think prevention would be far better, so I would agree with you in that it isn't being spent in the way it should be.
Just let's go international then, treat the treatable. So if you look in leukemia, for example, in children, a great example of how research and actually investment in treatment has moved from 50% to 90% of children. However, if you live in Zimbabwe, you have a 10% chance. And that's not to do with money, that's actually to do with how services are actually rendered, because in that situation they're not getting access to chemotherapy. So I do think we need to be broader, and I was glad that the opposition proposers did say we shouldn't be too insular and just think about the Lisburn Road and no further. We need to be thinking actually broader in relation to that.
Okay, thank you very much. I think I'll give the floor to Professor Frank Key just to briefly sort of summarise the debate, and then we can go for a vote afterwards. Okay?
These will be somewhat disconnected random reflections, I'm sure. I've just introduced myself. I'm a public health physician. I work in Queen's in the Centre for Public Health. Years ago I also, and still do in fact, wrote a lesser role worked at the sharp end of the old health boards which commissioned cancer services, and so I've seen what it is, as Mark said, to reorganise cancer services and the benefits that reorganisation in the mid-1990s brought about. So I feel I can bring to bear to this debate a perspective of, a commissioner of services. I want to see services developed in all sorts of ways. I heard many different things on both sides that I disagreed with. What stood out for me, I'm just going to make a few points that stood out for me. Appeals to emotion with facts and figures. There were lots of appeals to emotion. 1 in 3 of us will get cancer, or 1 in 4 of us will die of cancer. You know what? 1 in 1 of us will die. Right? We're going to die of something. We're going to die of something. I want my last months to be good quality months. And I'm going to give you a personal vignette here. 10 years ago, I did a study of lung cancer patients about the way their disease is staged so that the clinicians looking after those patients could either get radiotherapy and chemotherapy, or some surgeon would get at them and give them a chance of cure. Right? Whenever they're trying to make that judgment, they put them in a scanner, and it was just around the time the PET scanning was coming into being, the latest fancy kits and whatnot. And no X-ray or PET scan or MRI, whatever, is 100% accurate. So some scans will get it wrong, and there's a couple of ways of getting it wrong. Some people will say, well, we've staged you correctly, you're not a candidate for surgery, but here we can give you the best chemotherapy, etc. And radiotherapy. Alternatively, they may get it wrong and say, well, we do think you're a candidate for surgery, but they actually missed something, and the patient gets all the side effects from having had mutilating surgery on his chest when really they shouldn't have. The study we did actually was to look at that as a decision problem from the perspective of the accuracy of the diagnosis and the trade-offs that the patient was prepared to do. I want to know what it's going to be like being a surgical patient, going through quite major thoracic surgery. Tell me what it's like to be a chemotherapy patient and the side effects. And then tell me what it's like, to know that I got the wrong option, that I went through surgery but got all the side effects of the day, drains that didn't close, etc. Or the other way around, getting chemotherapy when you should really have had surgery. Now, I did that study, actually, it was within, the study presented itself to me, but that was exactly the situation in which my father died. He got a chance at surgery. He was staged with traditional technology, CT scans. The surgeon gave him a chance. He got a thoracotomy, took part of his lung out. The last year of his life was horrible. Even though he thought he had had a chance of cure, the last year of his life was horrible. He was walking around short of breath. Within months, he had all these drains that weren't closing and whatnot. So that is the perspective of a patient. And there were appeals to motion. Let's say it in the perspective of the patient. So what we did in this study was look at the decision problem and ask the patients to say, how would you trade off these chances? Getting the right option or getting the wrong option, whether the X-ray, the test got it right or got it wrong. And what we did when we did the mathematics of, a decision model, it wasn't the accuracy of the test that had the greatest bearing. It was how the patients traded off either being a false positive or a false negative, and how they would live with the consequences. The patient perspective is very important. So that's just a personal vignette. To one extent, I withdrew from the appeal to emotion, but we do have to keep the patient to the fore. And another point at the very, very start is that at the very start, Professor Lawler wanted a point of motion, a point of accuracy, like give me the figures for cancers you're quoting from. Well, Beth was quoting from a report by Professor Carl Claxton, sponsored by the NIHR, the National Institute for Health Research, on what we spend our money on and whether it's a good buy for the money. Now, that report is 400 pages long, but there was a summary published on their website. It was covered in all the newspapers. Carl did 18 BBC and ITV broadcasts on the thing, did Jeremy Vine's show, Newsnight, he was on all of them, being taken to task about having the temerity to publish this, because what he said was that the Cancer Drugs Fund was unethical because it was denying other people's benefit, people with other conditions. That was a recurring theme in the proposers' arguments tonight. The only interjection tonight that got a round of applause was when you stood up and said, you know, it's the fact that all services are underfunded. But what I would say is, from the perspective of the taxpayer, our health service has a cap. You know, we have to live in the here and now. We do have a fixed budget. I'm totally in favour of arguing for more resources for everybody, including cancer. But the bald truth of it is that we have a fixed budget. So we have to make choices. Some people called health economics a long, long time ago the dismal science. Right. It probably is a dismal science, although Carl Jackson, I would say, is just about the smartest person I've ever met. It probably is a dismal science, but it's a science about making choices. Because we live in the real world, we have choices to make. And what Carl was doing was just trying to set out the choices. Now, I want to quote from some of Mark's friends, okay? So, Mark's friend, Professor Richard Sullivan, from the Institute of Cancer Policy in London said, and this is a quote from Mark, from the director of the Institute of Cancer Policy, the Cancer Drugs Fund was a cheap political fix. Worse, it is unethical. You cannot give priority to cancer over all other serious illnesses, including coronary ailments and dementia. These types of patients are just as deserving of expensive medicines as cancer patients. Another friend, Mark, from the Institute of Cancer Research, Angela Kukula, said, cancer drugs are a bit special.
I'm sorry, can I have a point of information? She's not my friend.
But you do know Richard.
I do know Richard.
Yes. Angela from the Institute of Cancer Research said,
I'm not sure whether the chair is actually allowed to influence the...
I'm quoting what they said in public. So cancer drugs are a bit special, but they're not so special that they need a separate agency to finance their use. I'm saying these are things that cancer specialists are saying. A well-designed system to ensure that innovative but expensive medicines are made available for all serious illnesses should be able to accommodate cancer drugs. Their special needs, she added. I'm in favour of increasing the spend on cancer. The motion was whether it was overfunded from the perspective of the taxpayer, whether cancer was overfunded. That's why I asked the question about research, because research is a public and a private enterprise. I want to try to bring you all back to the perspective of the taxpayer who has to live within a budget ceiling. And that's the cruel, bald truth of the matter. And I mean, as I say, on both sides there were lots of issues and statements that I took issue with, like cancer being self-inflicted. I didn't like that statement, you know, and that came from the proposal, or I can't remember where it came from, self-inflicted. I don't agree with that. I don't agree with that. If you look at the causes of causes, society has to produce broader solutions than that. So I think we have to look at this in the round. And you know, you're going to cherry pick the statistics. One final thought. Danny Kahneman, the Nobel laureate in economics, published a book a couple of years ago, which some of you will have read, called Thinking Fast, Thinking Slow. It's based broadly on the Nobel work that he did in behavioural economics. He cited in that book several times a famous study done by political scientists, where the political scientists were put in a room and presented with a debate issue and asked to either vote yea or nay on that debate. But the people that they brought into the room were polarised. Some were very adamantly for the debate, some were very adamantly against the debate. And then they brought in scientists to present bald facts, you know, neutral bald facts. And these are the facts of the issue that some of you polarised people maybe weren't aware of. They then re-polled them, and they found that each side had just retrenched their position. So Danny Cameron's point is that we're subject to that sort of retrenchment bias. We're very seldom moving our position when we hear the facts. So there are a lot of facts bandied about, but I'm quite pessimistic about whether people move their retrenched positions. Thank you.
Actually brought that up. So this is the first time this year we've taken a preliminary vote, so we will now see if people have changed their sort of opinions. So remember back like an hour and a half ago, we voted based on opinion. So if you all to get your membership cards, if you have membership cards, so everybody can vote in the first one, only members can vote in the second vote. And the first vote is for your opinion. So has this debate changed your mind? I mean, from the start of the debate, have you changed your mind? Have you stayed? Do you want to abstain because you don't know? So everybody who would vote on the side of this House believes cancer treatment is overfunded, could you raise your hand and say aye?
17, Madam President.
21, I got.
You get 21? I'll give some people.
I think 21. There's like loads here.
Oh, sorry. Yeah, I'll get 1. I miss someone every week, sorry. Apologies for joking.
And all of those who would now vote for the opposition of the motion, this House does not believe that cancer treatment is overfunded. Please raise your hand and say nay. And all those who would like to abstain on the motion? Pardon? 11. Okay. So based on opinion, the proposition, it was 12 for the prop, 18 for the op, and 21 abstaining. Now there's 21 for the proposition, 11 for the opposition, and 7 abstaining, so the have shifted a bit. And this vote is for members, so raise your membership card when you're voting, and this is for the side of the debate who spoke best. So if you think proposition spoke better tonight, or opposition spoke better, or they both spoke equally well or equally rubbish, you can abstain. So those who would vote for the proposition to speak better tonight, please raise your membership cards. All the prop. 50. And all those who think the opposition spoke better tonight, please raise your hand. Guests can vote as well, if you want.
That's an hour.
50. And all those who like to abstain or think that they spoke equally well or equally bad. Eight. And if you would like to get a wee shiny membership card to vote next week, you can. So based on that, the proposition have won the debate tonight, based on speaking performance. Thank you very much. Like I said, thank you to Councillor Focus and I and our guests for tonight. And also, we're going to the pub afterwards, Parlour Bar, and please register for the Irish Times, UCD ID this weekend, and ask on Facebook. Thank you.
Well done, guys. Congratulations, well done.
Well done.
That was good fun. Cheers, well done. Cheers.
Thanks for reaching over.